Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam, and today we have a special treat. We've got another reporter roundtable, our sometimes monthly reporter roundtable, and this week's special guest is Politico reporter Gary Fineout. Stick with us. We'll be talking about the legislative session, Governor Ron DeSantis, and the presidential election. We'll see if I can get Gary to make any predictions.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida.
Back in the Terracotta room, and this time with another one of my OGs, Gary Fineout. Gary Fineout, it's a pleasure to have you here in downtown Tallahassee at the News Service of Florida's HQ in the room with me.
I'm so glad to be here. It's a nice room. The sun is shining. The weather's nice today. So what's not to like? And
it is truly terracotta. Now you understand why we call it that.
No, I do. I had always wondered about that. When you would say that on your podcast, like terracotta. Okay.
Yes, we ain't lying, folks. Gary Fineout, you have been around for a minute in Florida.
That's a nice way of saying old.
No, I can't call you old because then I would be ancient. So you've been a reporter at a lot of different news organizations over the years, and you're probably more intimate with the nuances of state government in Florida than anyone I know. And I mean that as a compliment. Just don't get started on the FEFP. You want to give us a little rundown of where you've been and where you're at?
I've somehow managed to remain gainfully employed for most of my career. There are a few gaps there in the resume. But no, I started out a long time ago with the Tallahassee Democrat, and that was the first newspaper that I was at, although I started at my college newspaper, which is no more.
The Florida Flambeau.
Florida Flambeau, although the name is with...
All hail the Florida Flambeau. I heard you say, warning people not to take the Flambeau's name in vain the other day in the press gallery.
Correct. Correct. But so the Tallahassee Democrat, and then, I've worked with the Miami Herald and the New York Times regional newspapers,
where I also
where you also were.
Gave birth to the Dara Cam.
And Associated Press, I was with the Associated Press for
so did I
many years, and then last 5 years, it's hard to believe it's been that long, I've been with Politico.
Yeah, that was a big deal when you went to Politico. They got them a senior. But you're a reporter. What's your title?
I'm primarily a reporter. I'm based here in Tallahassee and cover state government and state policy, but I still do a lot of political stuff because I was doing a lot of political stuff when I was the author of Florida Playbook, and I've transitioned off of that, and I'm now doing this.
Were you in Iowa? Did they send you to Iowa?
I did get to spend a week in Iowa. I missed all the bad weather. It was, I was there. It was in the mid 30s in the day, and it was in the 20s at night, and there was not really any snow. It kind of snowed a little bit the last day. And then I needed to return in time for session.
Right.
And it was then right after I left, the heavens opened up and it became really bad and really cold.
It was really bad. And we saw those videos and pictures of the governors, of the state agency heads tromping through the snow and ringing on doorbells in sub-zero temperature. Well, let's just dig right in. The legislature is in session this week. We are not quite at the midpoint of the 60-day legislative session yet. I have a couple of questions for you about Ron DeSantis.
Sure.
Everybody knows, we've talked a lot about it on this podcast and in the press gallery about his fractious relationship with the media. Tell me, when you were in Iowa, did you get to see a different side of him that you hadn't seen here in Florida before?
No.
Okay.
I was at a couple of events that he held in Iowa. Mm-hmm. He did events all over the state, and I tried my best to get to some of them, but it was he had a gaggle at one of the
Ron
events.
be Ron.
He had a gaggle at one of the events I went, but no, I don't think it was any sort of different than what we've seen, from him here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, of course, the big difference is that I would say that, of course, over the course of that presidential campaign, you did see him talk to a lot of media outlets, especially towards the latter end. And, of course, he made those comments to Hugh Hewitt where he sort of regretted his media strategy and what it was. But what I would say is it's interesting in the sense that, a key question to me going forward is how much will he engage with the Tallahassee media, because he really has engaged not that much with them over the last couple of years.
With us.
Yeah, with the reporters based in Tallahassee.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, in terms of going forward, will there be a recalibration there or not?
Well, we aren't national. You are national. You're part of a national organization. So a lot of the stories that you write make it to national Politico, right?
No, yes. My stories appear on the Politico homepage, and they are noted.
He's chuckling.
Yes, that is the case, but that hasn't translated into
more access.
Yeah, I think I do communicate with his people on his staff on both the campaign and official side, and that was there before, and that appears to be the same now. But in terms of I didn't get any special access over the last couple of years, and so I just don't know. Politico, we did have a sit down with him in 2020.
You were the only ones.
At that period in time, yes. We had a sit down in 2020.
And it was because I remember this because I was like sore about it, because you guys got to sit down with him. And he had not done, unlike, remember back in the day when Jeb used to do, at the end of the year, he'd bring in the media organizations,
yes, one
by one, sometimes two by two. And he would sit there and talk to you for an hour. And, that was your one-on-one with the man who has his, who controls the levers of state government. And Rick Scott stopped doing that. I don't remember, but he did have press conferences in his office. I remember going to some of them. And, this governor rarely has a press conference where you can really ask questions in Tallahassee. And he certainly doesn't do the kind of sit downs that, we were once afforded.
No. He doesn't do those. And I think you're absolutely right. For those of us who have been here a while, it has been it's been an evolution. I don't really know what...
An evolution or a devolution?
Well, changed. I'll just say changed.
It's morphed. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It was kind of either under Bush, there was either a year-end interview or a pre-session interview.
Right.
You usually got something, some amount of time. I think many times it was just as 15 minutes. There were a handful of times that they would set up a phone call with Bush and reporters, and you could talk to him that way.
You could also grab him coming down the steps
True.
Before the cabinet meetings.
Yes, he always
because they used to have cabinet meetings.
Yes, and they would do it, and he would do an avail before every cabinet
Yeah.
meeting, and then of course, if you remember, then it kind of changed, and then the avails were done after the cabinet meeting.
Yes, because we were all crowded on the stairs coming
Right.
down into the cabinet, the lower level. Gosh, I do sound like my grandmother back. I walked uphill 3 miles to.
No, but and then there was a period under Scott that instead of doing a post cabinet avail, they were you remember under a particular chief of staff, they actually did it in his office, in his actual formal office.
It was like 30 minutes after or something. They would do
Right.
it in his office.
And there was interesting because there was a couple of times that the press ran out of questions, and they were like, "Okay, I guess we're done now." And and DeSantis.
Oh, the halcyon days of.
DeSantis has on many occasions would do avails after cabinet meetings. I wouldn't say that he would do them in the cabinet room. I'm searching my mind, and I think he did some press avails at the Emergency Operations Center. I think over the last few months when there were some when we had Adelia threatening the state and things of that nature. But no, he really over the last couple of years he's not done that many instances where he's interacted directly with the Tallahassee media.
Right.
He obviously has done things across the state and answered questions at those events, but here not so much.
Well, I should note that I was out all year last year due to my various injuries, and so I don't know what happened with cabinet meetings and questions and press conferences because I was doing it all
We didn't really have that many cabinet meetings.
I know. But now we've got, and I don't know when the next one is going to be.
Last time I looked,
I think there were like 4.
Yeah, I think they moved one to March. I think.
Okay.
So I think that's what it is.
All right. Well, so I'm interested in your take on what's going on the plaza level right now. The governor's come back from his, he's dropped out of the presidential race. Right. The legislature, he did that while the legislature was in session, I believe. And so, people have asked, how's he going to come back? Is he going to come back as a
and we wrote and I wrote a story to that extent, and had some people with some people who were predicting revenge and other people who were saying no, he's going to be the same as he's been before. I think the initial situation is like clearly he's weighed in on some legislative matters since he returned. Earlier this week he added a couple of things because the House had already passed items calling for a convention of the states to deal with balanced budget and term limits, and he said no, he wanted 2 others, and so my understanding is the House and Senate plan to do those, and so I think the question is, and he has things in his budget that he wants, so
isn't that like a lot of what's it, sound and fury signifying nothing though? Well, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
I was having this conversation with someone just earlier today, and I think you can view DeSantis however you want in terms of whether or not you like his policies or don't like his policies, but in terms of his power and in terms of his clout and in terms of his influence, anything that is a change is going to be noticed. And what people, I think, kind of realize, especially people in Tallahassee, obviously, what they have realized is that he is one of the most powerful governors that there has been in Florida history.
He is the most powerful governor. I'm going to say it. He is the most powerful governor in modern Florida history.
Yeah. And there's a variety of reasons. Obviously, part of it is because his own sort of the way he used the governor's office and the powers that past governors had that he felt and was able to use in a broader fashion. So we all know that's there. So now that he's no longer running for president, and now that he's back here, is the relationship going to remain the same? And the answer is probably not. The relationship will change, and there's already signs that the relationship has changed somewhat with the legislature. So, but what I think is important to sort of, as I'm kind of watching how this play out, is I got to take a pause and say, well, wait, I'm not necessarily going back to the days of where,
there's an equal branch of government.
Well, no, I'm not going to go back to the days
I'm kidding.
Where a governor is in open, turmoil with the legislative branch.
Right.
I mean, we clearly there were a couple of moments with Rick Scott where basically Rick Scott was running television ads in the districts of members who were opposing him on an economic development issue.
That's true.
So I don't think I don't think it's going to get to that, obviously. But I think the point that I'm making is that we had DeSantis at a particular level and a particular level of influence and power, and he may not have that as much.
Yeah.
Or it's not going to be as I just don't think we're ever going to see a session like last year. I mean, obviously this session is nothing like, and that's why I tell people, it's like, and I even wrote some things about this. It's like it's a 180. It's a complete 180 from what it was a year ago. Because a year ago, the legislature was pushing through a long line of bills that he and his supporters wanted and his allies wanted because they wanted to enhance his presidential run as much as possible. And I remember I even had a story in which I quoted somebody, didn't use their name, but there was somebody in the DeSantis orbit who said point blank, we don't want any place on the right flank for him to be attacked. And because we're going into these, he's going to run for president. And,
okay, right. So he's trying to out-Trump Trump on the right.
So now we're in a situation where he was campaigning in Iowa, New Hampshire. He did not come up with a long list of things that he told the legislature to do. He does have some things he wants. It's not like he's, there's nothing on his list, but it's nothing like last year.
Right.
And so I think you just put all that together, like I said, and the fact that he's now not running for president. We open question as to what his next political move is and where he's going to go and how that's going to present itself. So I think I think it's just, it should be expected that it's going to be different.
Okay,
and because it's different, it's going to be noticeable to people from what we had the last couple of years.
Okay, but you wrote a story, I think it was this week, maybe it was last week, about the bill that a senator had sponsored that would essentially steer $5 million towards Trump's legal bills, right? Give him use state funds to pay for Trump's legal bills.
Right.
DeSantis said he didn't like it.
Right.
And 10 seconds later, the bill was withdrawn.
I think it was an hour.
Okay. So accuse me of exaggerating, but I mean, that's an example of the kind of power the governor still has. And
yeah.
I think the idea that the legislature is going to bow up, and I mean, I totally agree with you. I don't think we're going to see that.
No.
The tension between the branches.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget Renner, House Speaker Paul Renner, and Senate President Kathleen Passidomo. I mean, they endorsed him, and they've been very supportive of him, and they've worked hand in hand with him. I don't think it necessarily was going to go from that to
right.
Oh, we're at complete odds. What I think is, I think that the legislature, because it had already started its session, I think that part of it is also they're like, well, we've got our agenda and we're moving ahead with our agenda. But we're going to see how all this plays out. I mean, it's interesting when he made those comments last week where he said, I kind of like the concept of the social media bill, but I'm not sure if the wording is right and whether or not it's going to, how's it going to withstand judicial scrutiny. So that wasn't a veto threat, but clearly it was the governor signaling, I maybe want to see some changes. And so it'll be interesting to see
That's the bill that would restrict, I'm not sure which bill he was referring to. There's two bills, one that would ban children under the age of 16 from having social media accounts. That's getting pushed back. Well, my understanding is that's getting pushed back within Republican circles because they want parents to have the opt-in. They want them to be able to, or opt out, or whatever. They want parental control over whether their child 16 or under has a social media account. Have you heard that? That's what I'm hearing.
No, I mean...
So it doesn't surprise me that the governor would say, maybe not so much. Maybe that might come in.
And that might be part of it. I'm not covering that bill closely, so I haven't heard all the back and forth on it. I'm merely talking about it in the context of, the governor has weighed in. We're going to wait to see whether or not that results in changes being made that will supposedly get him more on board. Mm-hmm. And I think the priorities of both Renner and Passidomo are they going to be altered or going to be tweaked to make the governor more comfortable? Or here's what I don't expect. What I don't expect is, let me just use an example, redistricting. I don't necessarily expect the legislature to say, yeah, we hear that you don't like this bill, but we're going to pass it anyway. And then be surprised that he vetoes it. I assume that, that said, the governor's vetoed lots of bills over his time in office, and sometimes they are kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize the governor had an issue with that bill. But I think redistricting is a special case in the sense that he kind of had already telegraphed quite clearly that he was not in favor of what they were doing.
Right.
And he basically then came out and said, I'm going to veto the bill. I told you I was going to veto the bill. So that I draw a distinction there. But
I think there's also a point to be made that he and Paul Renner, I think, share a lot of the same, like they are coming from a very much aligned ideological perspective. I think they are much closer together than, say, Pasadoma, or at least what we used to think Pasadoma, the Senate president, there was a perception maybe that she was more moderate. I think some of that perception might have changed after the Senate passed the 6-week abortion ban, although she does say that, she got some of those exceptions in there that they didn't want. And so that's,
no, we reported at the time that all of that was happening. We reported that, quoted a Democratic state senator who said point blank that Pasadoma had told him that bill was not coming. And then it did. And so I hear what you're saying. But you're also, it's also interesting is that it seems to me that Pasadoma does have communications with the governor. And I think, we kind of mentioned it in a pre-session story that she had kind of talked to him like sometime in late last year, where she was sort of trying to get a feel for what his agenda is. So I think she works with him, and
I'm not saying she doesn't. I'm just saying that on the political ideological spectrum, I think that deep down inside, Paul Renner and Ron DeSantis are probably more closely aligned than Ron DeSantis and Kathleen Pasadoma. And I'm not making any value judgment about it. I'm not drawing any assumptions from it. I'm just saying, based on conversations I've had with the two legislative leaders, that's my sense.
Sure,
but
I understand your point.
I also, so I'm saying like it wouldn't be a surprise in that to sort of to kind of bolster my argument or our arguments that let's not expect that the legislature is just going to go hog wild and pass stuff that the governor is going to be inclined to veto, because I think they are much more aligned in terms of their visions and their priorities.
But I also think it's because Pasadoma and Renner have priorities, and they hope that the governor will sign off on them. Pasadoma has another, her Live Healthy Act, the bill that seeks to boost the workforce in the medical fields. That's a bill that's got a hefty price tag, and it has a lot in it. And so I would think that you want to work with the governor to make sure that you help with some of the things he wants, because you get him on board for what you want.
Hang tight. We'll be right back with Gary Fineout.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. One of the things that we've talked about with the on here before with the media is that about the governor's interaction with the media. While we're still on the governor, the issue of the governor, just to sort of finish out this thought, do you think that his people, Christina Pushaw, I think, is a good example of it, have been very combative on social media and, going like mano a mano with reporters and even, other candidates, in fact, or their surrogates. Do you think that we're going to see a little bit of a taming of that now, or do you think that we'll see more of the same?
Well, I think for some of those individuals, I don't know if they're going to sort of change the way they operate. I mean, I think clearly there was a strategy that was carried out in the reelect. And that strategy obviously changed for the presidential campaign because you can't kind of do things the same way. But again, yes, I mean, there are defenders of DeSantis. I think part of it is what do they do next, and what's their next job, what's their next focus. I think that may play a big role into how the interactions are. I think I've seen some things even the last couple of weeks where since the governor dropped out, where at least his press secretary has continued to be very assertive about the governor's point of view about things and the viewpoints that people might have about the governor. I don't think I've seen a huge wholesale change on that. And frankly, what's the fallout of the back and forth?
It was always kind of a fine line, though, don't you think, for Republicans in Florida to walk that tightrope between like fearing alienating or pissing off Donald Trump and fearing of alienating or pissing off Ron DeSantis, because they both have really long, they're both.
Well, one of the stories, and it got written about a little bit, but one of the things that kind of went on during the course of his presidential campaign is the combat between the Trump surrogates and the DeSantis surrogates got, for lack of a better word, downright hostile at times.
Yeah.
I was there when a particular Trump supporter who has a very large presence on social media chased the governor's campaign person, one of his campaign press people, into the bathroom and waited for him to come out in order to confront him. And
wait, who was that?
No, it happened. It was written about it. I got a little. No, Laura Loomer.
Oh, yeah.
Laura Loomer chased one of the governor's campaign people. So, and then I think she later was filming Christina Pushaw later that same day. So, my only point to bring that up is people could decide who they want to support in that. But I'm merely saying it got really animated at times, and it got really hostile. And I think I guess there was an interesting dynamic that happened this week. I didn't write about it. I just saw some of the coverage where I guess Evan Power, the new chair of the Republican Party, was possibly going to do something with Loomer, and then you saw some of the people who were in the DeSantis camp who were like very angry. And then apparently he changed and then he changed his mind. So that's just interesting from my viewpoint, because I'm like, well,
it is
clearly there are fissures that remain and people are still upset. There was a story.
He's got his hands full, Evan Power.
Yeah, there was a story that the Associated Press did this week that was kind of interesting. It quoted a bunch of Trump voters in states like New Hampshire and said they wouldn't vote for DeSantis because they viewed him as that he should have never run against Trump.
Yeah.
So
they won't vote for him in a future election.
Because, let's be clear here. 4 years is an eternity in politics.
Sure it is.
So I'm sure people could probably change their minds over that. Of course, but I'm only getting at it from the standpoint of the people who were for Trump and the people for DeSantis. They were so at each other that I'm going to be interested to see. In fact, I think you saw there was a couple of people who were in the DeSantis orbit who threw their weight behind Trump, and there were some people in the Trump orbit who were like, too late. You should,
we don't need your
support now and everything like that. And so I'm just sitting here again, just watching it and observing it and saying, Well, so those, anyway, get back to the point. So are the people who are, I mean, obviously the governor's going to continue to have people who work for him, especially in his press office. I'm no doubt that they will continue to speak up for the governor and they will continue to defend him.
Sure.
The time will tell whether or not the tactics change.
Yeah, they're very loyal to their principles. And I mean principle meaning him. And a lot of the people that he has in higher up positions are former military people. He was in the military, and I think there's a strong sense of loyalty within that cohort. So, I mean, the people who work for him, as far as I can tell, really believe in him, and they're big fans of his. So, what are the stories you're most interested right now? What are you covering that we need to be informed about?
What we've just talked about for the last half hour is a big part of it. What is the governor doing?
Yeah.
What's he going to do?
Got any scoops? Any scooplets for us?
No, we don't have any scooplets for you. Where is he going to go from here? What is he doing? How that all plays out, and then just sort of the dynamic of the session. And we do have a handful of contentious bills. It's not like the legislature decided to be completely sort of just pro forma. There are some bills, and although what's interesting, and I think you can attest to this as someone who has also seen a fair amount of sessions, in a way it is a return to the way it used to be, which is sort of like the legislature would have these arguments and fights and special interest battles, and a lot of times the governor just stayed on the sidelines and you waited to see what happened at the end and whether or not the governor came in and took a stance. And so I'm not so much on. I obviously commented on the social media bill. I'm sure that if he's asked about other bills, like obviously the Trump legal fees bills, but I'm talking about
no. That's not where I'm pushing back. I'm not pushing back on him staying on the sidelines. I'm pushing back on that there are special interests and there's debate and there's things. I feel like everything is so scripted nowadays. I mean, I have been walking around in the Capitol.
Yeah.
Everything, like the cake is baked before the gavel comes down on opening day. And I have been lobbyists since before session started, but now even more so, are complaining to me that they can't get the amendments. Legislators
I
won't file amendments unless they get permission from the fourth floor, especially on the House side. So I don't think there's a lot of, the kinds of food fights that we once saw where there was any kind of drama. Right. There are some bills that are moving right now that we don't know what's going to happen with them. And these are some of the sexier ones that I'm following. Vacation rentals, as of today, these will be coming up in a House committee and on the Senate floor tomorrow. When we're recording this on Wednesday, it won't be done because the House won't be done with it, but there will be movement on this issue, which has been a perennial food fight. Right. So that is something that we don't know what the outcome of that is going to be yet. We also have a renewed effort. I don't think you're writing about this anymore, but we have a renewed effort to impose THC caps on marijuana products. That's, right. Because the governor, I think part of the reason that may be getting more attention and more traction is because the governor weighed in. I wrote a little item on that last week that a marijuana advocate in New Hampshire was in New Hampshire and asked DeSantis about the proposed constitutional amendment that would authorize the use of marijuana for people over age 21. And DeSantis said it was going to be on the ballot. And so people who don't know how the Florida process works thought right away, some people thought that meant it's going to be on the ballot. Well, no, the Supreme Court hasn't decided yet whether to put it on the ballot.
But the arguments on that matter in front of the Supreme Court lead one to believe that they were not accepting of, not word accepting is the wrong word. Let's just say they appeared to have a bit of skepticism as to the arguments made by the Attorney General.
They were surprisingly skeptical of the Attorney General's arguments for why it should not go on the ballot.
But I would say that there are a handful of other issues that you're kind of watching, and it doesn't appear like. I mean, some of the differences between the House and the Senate, are they going to come together, or is the thing just going to fall apart? Perfect example is you got several bills that deal with lawsuits and litigation, and
yes,
and, I mean, you've got discussion about whether or not you want to change the medical malpractice laws and relates to who can sue. And then we had because the Senate then attached a bill that put reinstated caps in those lawsuits, which had been tossed away by the courts, and so you see that's going on, and then you have like sovereign immunity changes and things. And
I did hear that they want to raise the cap for sovereign immunity.
And then there's another bill that has to do with identifying who's the sources of litigation, and so I think I'm using those as just a handful of examples.
Sure.
I think and I think you and I are also keenly trying to figure out, are certain gambling bills to move? Are they what's the behind the scenes going on that?
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying about scripted.
Yes.
But so how about we put it this way? There may be a debate going on somewhere in Tallahassee. We're just not sure if it's all taking place in public. But we're under the impression there may be a debate about whether or not certain bills are going to move.
That's true. You're right. I overstated it. But there is a large degree of kabuki theater kind of going on where the outcome is already determined. The police is on the chessboard.
Especially over the last several years, especially when we had special sessions.
Yes.
I mean, we had these special sessions where they were interesting, where bills for those special sessions didn't appear until like right before the special session.
Right.
But once they appeared,
they were out.
They were done.
Yeah.
It was not going to be changed.
Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. What do you think that we're not paying enough attention to in Tallahassee that we should be paying attention to?
Well, I always think that there's probably a lot of things that should be paying attention to that we in the media probably do not spend enough time on trying to figure out. Part of it, of course, is just trying to figure out where a bill comes from and who's behind it and what the thought process is and what they're trying to get out of it. I think that there are certainly several bills that, I think we're watching these child labor bills and things dealing with unemployment.
Really interesting, the child labor one.
Yeah, and those are getting covered. I don't want to make it sound like.
Yeah.
But there's just a lot of just kind of wondering in my mind, trying to figure out what is the point of this policy, why is it being done, and try to pull it all together in terms of how it would affect people. And so I always worry that I'm not doing a good enough job at that. And who wants this bill and who benefits from this bill, and what is the thought process here? Because anyone who's covered Tallahassee, anyone who's been involved in this process knows that there are many different reasons that bills get passed or get taken up, and sometimes we in the media don't always do the best job of explaining why something is being done. I mean, sometimes of course it's just a messaging bill. I mean, the bill that, let me use an example, the bill on Confederate memorial monuments.
Explain what the bill does.
Well, what that bill would do is it would block cities and counties. It would basically create a state preemption and would not allow cities and counties to remove...
Preemption!
They would not allow cities and counties to remove memorials.
Yeah.
And monuments, and
which comes as this has been a movement to remove a lot of
this
these.
has happened over the last several years, but the latest flashpoint came in Jacksonville.
Yes,
it basically the Women of the Southland monument that was removed from a park in Jacksonville. So that one, you understand what's at work there. You understand
the constituency for that bill. You understand
the constituent for that bill and what the goal is. It is some of these other bills that, do we do a good enough justice trying to... I mean, there are some people who have covered this process who've been very good at ferreting out like that some tax cut or something like that.
Jason Garcia
is to benefit a particular person or company or something like that. And so,
Yeah.
Obviously, when we had the bills over the last couple of years that dealt with Disney, those were relatively easy. We kind of understood where they. So that's what I always worry about, is whether or not doing a good enough job, sort of
Connecting the dots.
That's what I constantly think to myself.
You do a good job of that, and I think sometimes when you've been around a while, you've got connections. You've got sources, and you've got an understanding of how things work. You know where to find things. But one of the problems is that I encounter is just time and resources, and we don't have the kind of luxury to spend weeks and investigating things and connecting those dots. We have the time and the ability to identify the dots, but a lot of times connecting them is where we lack the resources.
Well, and you also could do public records requests and things of that nature, but then you don't know how quickly those are going to be fulfilled. That's a whole other issue. But that also means that maybe eventually you'll find out or figure out where something came from, but not in the immediate when the bill is moving quickly through the process. Yeah,
that is a whole nother. I had Barbara Peterson on. We could have gone on for hours about the whole public records.
And as to that may be probably something that we also have not spent as much time delving into this session. There are still a lot of public records exemptions.
Yes.
And you see more and more are coming.
Yes.
And you understand what people are saying about it, but what's interesting is just the continued sort of arc towards nearly everyone who's in. I exaggerate. I don't want to exaggerate.
No, let me do that.
But a lot of people. They start in one place, and then suddenly it's this person in public government who works for the government. Yeah. Their information is off limits, and then it gets expanded.
The dog catcher.
And then it gets expanded to this person and this person and that person and that person, and so to the point where what information are you going to be able to get about anybody?
Anybody who's on a board or whoever served on a board of any kind, you don't know. I mean, it's interesting development this week. The Marsy's Law, I think, is a good example of that. And the the Supreme Court found there's no justification in the law for keeping a victim's identity concealed. So that includes the name of a victim, and that includes the police officers, right? Which was what the PBA was saying, that Marsy's Law applies to police officers involved in use of force incidents, and of course that created a huge outcry. I did get a press release from the Marsy's Law people. So there's a bill now that would exempt police from having, would create an exemption for police from being identified. But the Marsy's Law people said that they don't want to have it to be used to shield the identities of officers involved in use of force incidents, which I thought was a real move, because they did not come out that strongly during the litigation.
Well, right, and it is important to remember that, of course, there was a divide among, even in the law enforcement community, as to whether or not that the Marsy's Law applied, and you had different sheriffs across the state who took different positions.
So that's another one that we don't know what the outcome of that is going to be, but I think I can guess.
But I'm just saying, I just meant that in a general sense of probably, I don't think there's been a lot of attention looking at the public records bills this year, and probably something we need to do to sort of, obviously last year there was quite a bit of coverage, I would say, on the governor's flight records. But there's there's usually 40 or 50 public records bills every year. I mean, some of them are just reenacting.
Yes.
Some of them are just reenacting exemptions that were already there, and so, but every year they seem to bring more and more additional ones as well.
So, anything else that you're watching in the legislative process over the next 4 or 5 weeks?
Oh, well, obviously we try to keep an eye on the budget and see what happens there, and the tax cut package whenever it actually emerges, and whether or not the governor is able to get buy-in on some of the things he wants to do, including a 1-year rollback of some of the taxes paid on insurance premiums. And that's a consumer issue that I think is...
It's a pocketbook issue.
Yeah, pocketbook issue. I think you need to kind of keep an eye on that and see if that happens, or whether or not the legislature decides, no, we don't want to do that one, we'll do something else. And so I'm intrigued as to how that all plays out.
Do you think, speaking of the budget, this is like the only thing about the budget that I know anything about. So do you think that the House is going to go along, or the governor is going to go along with the Senate's plan to spend $3 billion over the next 30 years on prisons?
I think that's a very big question mark, in terms of what are they going to do and how that's all going to play out over I mean, obviously there's the study that came out that sort of tried
KPMG, shout out to KPMG. Hi, Monica Russell.
That spotlit the issues that they saw with the system. And so obviously the Senate has decided that they want to try to do something to tackle that. And I think the question is, is the House going to go along with that level of commitment?
Yay or nay? I say nay.
Okay, well, I don't know.
I don't think they're going to do $3 billion.
Right. Yeah.
You don't want to go. You don't want to make a prediction.
No, not on that, because I don't think I have a good enough feel for that for the thought process right now on that one.
Okay.
I can make some predictions on some other bills, but not.
Okay, make some predictions. What are you going to predict on?
Well, I mean, maybe I shouldn't have said that. I got to think about that for a moment.
Insurance. The insurance thing. Is that it? You said you couldn't predict?
No,
that.
I don't think I can predict that. No, okay. I mean, I think that they're, I'm not so sure about some of these bills that I know that are a flashpoint. I don't know.
The driver's license bill?
Yeah, that's, there's the driver's license bill, and then there's the bill, there's stuff. It's just when there's stuff especially when there's a bill on the House side. I mean, it's not that the legislature hasn't, and even last year with President Pasadoma, they did take up a couple of House bills that were not moving in the Senate, and they assigned them to a committee, and then they brought them back up and they passed them. So it's not that it's not going to happen. I just find it intriguing when there are a couple of bills, like let's take the age limit on the purchase of rifles. That
yes,
cleared a House committee.
I was going to ask you about that.
It's cleared a House committee this week.
So in the aftermath of Parkland,
right,
the school safety bill raised the age from 18 to 21 to purchase long guns.
Right. That
is the subject of litigation, and now the governor has advocated for rolling it back. And the House, did the House, full House or a House committee?
No, it's just a House committee.
Okay.
It cleared its first stop, and that bill did move through the House last year. I just don't know if it's going to go anywhere again this year. I just, I've seen no indications.
That's a hard bill to... That's a hard bill for some members of the legislature to stomach, because those parents of the Parkland kids that were murdered are against it. And
so it is, we have the constitutional amendment, proposed constitutional amendment to raise the threshold for passing a constitutional amendment. I think it's the 6th or 7th time that it's been presented.
Yeah.
It cleared a committee this week. Again, it's, the House spent time on it, but there's no indication that that's going to move in the Senate, or if there's any appetite in the Senate. So
there's even Senate bills that aren't maybe going to move. Like the Senate, is it Senator Angolia filed the bill that would make it harder to vote by mail, and the Senate president is
they
DOA.
Nixed that early.
She gave that the thumbs down.
It's been interesting. There's been a couple of bills that got the...
It's an election year.
That got sort of politely told the sponsors were politely told that that's probably not going to happen.
Right. Well, we'll get you back. Now we caught you off guard by asking, and the royal we, it's me and Gary in here. I don't know who else I'm referring to. Queen Dara will have you back, and we'll give you a chance to get your list of predictions before the legislative session is out. Let's look a little bit forward to 2024 November. Now, what do you think about Trump versus Biden rematch? I think we know where Florida is going to land, and
I feel more comfortable about
you can make a prediction on that.
Or make a prediction about. Certainly, all signals and indications is that the Democrats are going to have a very tough battle in Florida, and the situation has basically, changed over the last few years, as we've seen
Seismically,
yeah. I mean, and the Republicans have a very large voter registration advantage now.
Yeah.
They continue to in Florida. The parties are light years apart in terms of financing and organization and things of that nature. So it would seem that it would be I don't want to use the word shocking, but it would be quite an upset, I think, if Trump lost to Biden in this
Trump's
state.
not going to lose to Biden in this state. So I agree with you.
Plus, you can't get a definitive answer from the Democrats as to how much resources and time and energy they're going to put into Florida to try to even compete. So obviously we think at this point in time...
We haven't written Florida off, and yet all sign, it's like...
Yeah, correct. They say they haven't written Florida off. Now, the President Biden this week came to South Florida.
He did a fundraiser.
And he did fundraisers, and he got money from Florida.
Right.
And he made some comments, but again, what happened in 2022 was really interesting in that the fact that the National Democrats pretty much abandoned the state. They did. Yeah. I think they put like a total of maybe $2 million into the state that during those midterms. I just think you look at the situation and you just have to be realistic about this. If you're the Democrats and you're saying to yourself, well, we can spend all this money in Florida with these hugely expensive media markets. Or do we turn around and take that money and spend it in Georgia and Wisconsin and Michigan and Arizona?
It's math.
Yeah, it's math. And so now, what does that mean for the presidential election overall? I'm not. I don't think I can make that prediction. I think a lot of things are going to be at play here. I mean, I think what happens with Trump and his legal situation is going to be a big factor. You keep seeing this polling. I mean, is the polling correct? Look, I don't know. I haven't looked at the underlying numbers, but you have polling that suggests if he's convicted of a felony that could hurt his chances,
right.
And that there's just a segment of the electorate that is like, if that happens, they're going to have second thoughts about Trump. Then you have a situation where where's the economy going to be? I mean, there are signs that maybe they are going to have this soft landing, but again, then there's other issues with Biden's numbers across the board, across the United States, a lot of polls, not very good. And you see all this sort of comparisons and where he is compared to other presidents, and how is it too far? Is he too far down to be able to recover? But I don't know. I mean, we're going to have a do-over. It looks like we're going to have a do-over, and the question is, where is the American population, American voters, going to be? What headspace are they going to be in November? Are they going to be saying, "Oh, look, gas prices have been dropping this year, and inflation's finally under control, and so I'm not going to go"? Or are they going to basically say, "No, I can't go for another term of Biden because of problems at the border, and I'm concerned about the economy"? I mean, so
we don't know. All right. How about?
We don't know, because I just think there are a lot of things that could affect.
Of course, there's a lot of moving parts.
I mean, we have to be, let's be realistic here. It's, we really haven't had a presidential election where the candidate is facing multiple indictments, and
no, we haven't.
And even if you
was accused of fomenting an insurrection.
Right. But the other thing is just from a simple standpoint of, that's going to take a lot of time and energy for Trump to deal with. And so I don't even know if we're going to have a traditional, I've seen, there's some people who predicted that, there won't even be a debate.
I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't a debate.
Yeah. So but look, the last several years
he's not debating
been completely new every year from a standpoint of everything that you thought you knew about politics, you kind of didn't know.
Totally. Brand new day every day. Any ideas about whether the Democrats are going to be able to take back any of the legislative seats in the House or the Senate, or too soon to
what we
that?
We can definitely say is that you would think that the Democrats will have a better performance electoral during a presidential year. And we think there's the possibility that we'll have both possibly, we don't know yet because the Supreme Court hasn't decided yet, but we have both the recreational marijuana amendment and we have the abortion rights amendment. Now, I've talked to one political science professor who says, look, those things kind of affect elections in midterm years more than they do in the presidential year, because a lot of people are going to come out in a presidential election regardless. But I think what we saw in 2022 is that the Democrats, they saw their support and their voters just, there's a big, the story of the election is there was a huge gap between the number of Republicans who voted, percentage of Republicans who voted versus the percentage of Democrats who voted. And it was a sizable gap. And the question is, are the Democrats going to be able to not have that happen? And I think you saw some, not a lot, but you saw a handful of legislative seats that flipped, and you saw a couple of counties that flipped because that Democratic turnout was so depressed in 2022. So one would assume during a presidential year that will not be the same. Now, I think we can look at everything and say, certain things that we're going to predict are probably likely to happen. One is, it would seem to be unlikely that the legislature, either chamber, will flip. It would seem to be unlikely.
Oh, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, and then it would also seem to be unlikely. I don't know what's going to happen in the congressional races, but I would tell you that, barring a court, federal court, or Supreme Court ordering a new map, I don't think we're going to see a big change in the congressional delegation either. Yeah, now, of course, we don't have any other, we have the one statewide race we have is Rick Scott and Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. I'm sorry. We have Rick Scott, who is likely to run against Debbie Mucarsel-Powell because she does have a Democratic primary at this point in time. Yes. But one would assume that she's going to win the primary and it's going to be her against Rick Scott. And Rick Scott has a lot of advantages. Now, the only thing that kind of changes the math on that is, back to what I was talking about, are the National Democrats going to come in here and help out? And I think you have a lot of speculation as to, they're on the defense in so many states.
Yeah. I don't know.
Will they go after
a self-funder who could write a check for $50 million tomorrow?
That's absolutely true.
So I don't know. We'll have to talk about that another day. Listen, Gary Fineout, Politico reporter, my old pal, who has always been very kind to me and is literally one of the most talented and knowledgeable reporters in that Capitol building. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you come back and visit with us soon.
Well, those are very kind words. Thank you for having me on.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.